Well, they had a referendum in Crimea over the weekend. Did the Russians win? Do the Crimeans want to split away from Ukraine and join Russia? Well, could you tell from the results? I'm not quite sure. 97% said, yes, we'd like to join Russia. Now, of course, that's a bit of a joke. If you see a 97% result, that means that the election might not have been the fairest one you've ever seen in your life. So here's a couple of things that happened. First of all, there's a Tatar group that is minority in Crimea. They're Muslims. They got moved by the Russians from their homeland a long time ago into Crimea so they wouldn't cause trouble there. They've never liked the Russians. They certainly don't like the Russians now. Several villages that were, including one that was 98% Tatar, decided that they're not going to vote at all. A lot of ethnic Ukrainians who are in the area also said that to reporters that they didn't go out because they were afraid. Now, the reason they might be afraid is because Russian troops have surrounded them, literally, and are occupying the area. Now, look, the thing is, the Russians probably would have won this vote fairly easily anyway. They didn't have to do any of that because it's mainly ethnic Russian. We think they would have won anyway, but now we'll never know. They did not bring in international monitors. This was so poorly played, if you ask me. If I was them, I would have brought in the international monitors. I would have encouraged the Ukrainians, the Muslims, everyone else to vote and win the vote 60-40, probably 70-30 anyway, right? But no, they had to get 97% of the vote, which makes the Iranian elections look clean. Hamid Karzai thinks, well, I didn't get 97%. Even Saddam Hussein in his grave must have been thinking, well, Putin almost outdid me on that one. But I think Saddam got 99% in some of the elections. Okay, so of course the West is now not recognizing the election, saying that it is unconstitutional and against international law. But nonetheless, the Russian flag now flies over the buildings, government buildings in Crimea. There you see the Crimean flag in the front and the Russian flag in the back. And it is what it is. And furthermore, they say that Russian lawmakers, according to the Associated Press, have suggested that formally annexing Crimea is almost certain, with one saying it could happen within days. So they're not wasting any time, moving on. Yes, they jump in it, literally, and they hasn't. Okay. So the Crimean parliament declared that all Ukrainian state property on the peninsula will be nationalized and become the property of the Crimean Republic. That doesn't sound good. Okay, that's not encouraging. Now, there is a dispute as to whether they will nationalize the banks and take that money as well. Now, mixed reports on that. People are hoping that that doesn't happen because that's seen as a more extreme step. Now, some of the people there are ethnically Russian, and if you remember, Khrushchev did give Crimea to Ukraine back in 1954, right? And a lot of the Russians, after the Soviet Union fell apart, thought that Crimea should have been part of Russia, and they felt that they'd been unfairly put into Ukraine for 23 years. So some of them reacted by saying, we came back home to Mother Russia. Mother Russia is always a little scary. Anyway, we came back home. Russia is our home. Now, that is a legitimate point of view that a lot of people do have. Now, obviously, the other point of view did not get put on display during these elections. And remember, part of the reason that people didn't vote in the elections is because the second choice was not to be part of Ukraine. The second choice was to get more independence and be able to join Russia later. Again, there was no need for that, I don't think. But when you've got a sham election like that, you can't blame people for not participating. But again, others said, quote, we are Russian and proud of it. And they're a very legitimate part of what happened in this election as well, such as it is. Now, of course, the White House says this is all wrong. They say the international community will not recognize the results of a poll administered under threats of violence. Russia's actions are dangerous and destabilizing. So now, President Obama is also outraged, although you couldn't tell by the way he delivers this incredibly boring threat.
As I told President Putin yesterday, the referendum in Crimea was a clear violation of Ukrainian constitutions and international law, and it will not be recognized by the international community. Today I'm announcing a series of measures that will continue to increase the costs on Russia and on those responsible for what is happening in Ukraine. First, As authorized by the executive order I signed 2 weeks ago, we are imposing sanctions on specific individuals responsible for undermining the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and government of Ukraine. Second, I have signed a new executive order that expands the scope of our sanctions. As an initial step, I'm authorizing sanctions on Russian officials, entities operating in the arms sector in Russia, and individuals who provide material support to senior officials of the Russian government. Third, we're continuing our close consultations with our European partners, who today in Brussels moved ahead with their own sanctions against Russia. Fourth, we'll continue to make clear to Russia that further provocations will achieve nothing except to further isolate Russia and diminish its place in the world.
First time ever that someone has fallen asleep in the middle of issuing a threat. So that should have been tough. Like, we're coming for you, man. What he did there was said 4 Ukrainians, 7 Russians very close to Vladimir Putin have now had their assets frozen. They've got some travel bans, and he's saying we might do a hell of a lot more than that. But the manner in which he says it is like so unthreatening. Okay, it is what it is. At least he's doing the right thing. God bless. But nonetheless, he's going to continue with this kind of tough talk here.
Now, I believe there's still a path to resolve this situation diplomatically in a way that addresses the interests of both Russia and Ukraine. That includes Russia pulling its forces in Crimea back to their bases, supporting the deployment of additional international monitors in Ukraine, and engaging in dialogue with the Ukrainian government, which has indicated its openness to pursuing constitutional reform as they move forward towards elections this spring. But throughout this process, we're going to stand firm in our unwavering support for Ukraine.
What? Putin comes out and he's like, yeah, we will break your back and we will drink your spinal fluid, you dirty Americans, right? This guy comes out and says, oh, we will do some tough sanctions. Vladimir is like, wake me up when he is done. Okay. No, look, the bottom line is to do the right thing, and the fact that he's frozen the assets of some of the people closest to Putin is important. Now, they had quite a heads up that their assets were going to be frozen. If they still didn't move them out, they're dumber than I thought they were. So they might have just frozen some empty bank accounts at this point. But things, unfortunately, are looking worse and worse. Now, NATO said in a statement, according to the Associated Press, that the alliance was determined to boost its cooperation with Ukraine, including increased ties with Ukraine's political and military leadership. So now basically NATO is saying, hey, look, it's not just the sanctions that the EU did and the White House did over in the United States, but we're going to, roll in some of the military here and do some more cooperation with Ukraine. Now, that's problematic because the Russians have now moved their troops from the Crimean border to the border of Ukraine, meaning like, okay, we already took that part, and now our troops are on the next border. That could be problematic. In fact, more from the Associated Press. Russia raised the stakes Saturday when its forces, backed by helicopter gunships and armored vehicles, took control of the Ukrainian village of Strelkov and a key natural gas distribution plant nearby, the first Russian military move into Ukraine beyond the Crimean Peninsula of 2 million people. In other words, yeah, we'll take that too. Now, we're told that they have kept the gas plant but moved out of the village at this point. But the fact that they are now breaching the other border of Ukraine, the new border of Ukraine, according to the Russians, is not good news. So there does have to be some tough sanctions at least, and some tough actions against Russia if we don't want them to keep going. But as far as Crimea is concerned, it looks like it's pretty much gone. The only question is, will the Russians go further? In fact, President Obama said, before he put everyone in the room to sleep, quote, United States would continue to calibrate our response based on whether Russia continues to escalate or de-escalate this situation. That's a very important quote, because that translation is, we'll let them keep Crimea, but if they go any further, we're going to have real trouble.